Nobody in that room understood why a single word from the maid made an entire wedding rehearsal go completely silent. Not the guests, not the family, and certainly not the bride who had just ordered her out the door. Hey, welcome back. Before tonight's story starts, drop your country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. This one's about pride, about the danger of assuming you know someone's entire life just by the uniform they're wearing, and about a single sentence that stopped a room of 80 people cold. Stay till the end, because what happens after that silence will stay with you. Her name was Teresa Alvarado, 42 years old. For the past 3 years, she had worked as the head housekeeper for the Langford family, one of Savannah's oldest and most respected names. Cotton money turned into hotel chains, the kind of wealth that had quietly funded half the historic district over 4 generations. Teresa moved through the Langford estate with the calm efficiency of someone who had run far bigger operations than a single household, though nobody in that house had ever thought to ask her about her life before this one. The Langford patriarch, Preston, 67, mostly stayed out of the day-to-day, trusting Teresa completely with the running of the estate. His son, Bradley, 34, was set to be married in 3 weeks to a woman named Sabrina Cole, 29, the daughter of the Atlanta real estate developer, polished, camera-ready, and entirely convinced that her upcoming marriage into the Langford name made her the new authority over everyone who worked there. Stiff included, Sabrina had made her opinion of Teresa clear from the moment she started planning the wedding at the Langford estate. She corrected Teresa's instructions to the caterers in front of the caterers. She rearranged flower deliveries Teresa had already confirmed, then blamed Teresa when the timeline slipped. She referred to her, more than once, as the help, even after Preston had gently corrected her twice. Teresa said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that a woman planning her own wedding rarely wanted to be told she was wrong, and Teresa had bigger things to protect than her own pride. Namely, a job that let her support her elderly mother's care facility payments, 3 states away, quietly without complaint, the same way she'd supported everyone who'd ever depended on her. What nobody at the Langford estate knew, what Teresa had never once mentioned in 3 years of employment, was that before she folded linens and managed household staff, she had spent 14 years as an event director for one of the largest hospitality corporations in the Southeast, responsible for coordinating weddings, galas, and corporate functions. With guest lists in the thousands, budgets in the millions, and a reputation so precise that 2 5-star hotel chains had once gotten into a bidding war over her contract. She'd walked away from that career after a merger eliminated her entire division overnight, and after months of unanswered applications and a mother whose care costs kept climbing, she'd taken the Langford position out of necessity, telling herself it was temporary. 3 years later, temporary had quietly become her life, and she'd made peace with that, mostly. 3 days before the wedding rehearsal, everything Sabrina had painstakingly arranged began to unravel. Not because of Teresa, but because of the very people Sabrina had insisted on hiring instead of trusting Teresa's judgment. The outside event coordinator Sabrina had brought in, a young woman with an impressive portfolio and almost no experience running an event this size, had double-booked the ceremony space with another private function, miscounted the seating by nearly 30 guests, and completely failed to confirm the specialty catering order that half of Sabrina's out-of-town guests required for dietary restrictions. Sabrina discovered the seating error during the rehearsal walkthrough, standing in the middle of the Langford Estate's garden pavilion, with 80 guests watching her realize, in real time, that her wedding was 3 days away and badly broken. "This is a disaster," she said, voice climbing. Phone pressed to her ear as she tried and failed to reach her coordinator. "How does no one know how to fix this? Do I need to do everything myself?" It was in that exact moment, with Sabrina's composure fully unraveling in front of half the wedding party, that Teresa quietly stepped forward with a clipboard she'd been holding all morning and offered calmly, "I could help sort the seating if you'd like. I've done something similar before." Sabrina spun toward her, humiliation curdling instantly into anger, desperate for somewhere to direct it. "This isn't your job," she snapped, loud enough to carry across the pavilion. "You're the housekeeper. I don't need you pretending to understand event coordination on top of everything else falling apart right now. Just go, leave. I can't deal with this and you right now." The pavilion went quiet in the particular way rooms do when everyone senses someone has crossed a line they can't uncross. Teresa didn't argue. She simply nodded once, set the clipboard down gently on the nearest table, and turned to walk back toward the main house. She had made it exactly 4 steps when a voice near the back of the pavilion, calm, unfamiliar to most of the guests, but instantly recognized by two people in that garden, spoke up. Wait, Teresa Alvarado? Is that you? Every head in the pavilion turned. And Sabrina, phone still pressed uselessly to her ear, felt the first genuine flicker of dread she'd experienced all week. Wait, Teresa Alvarado? Is that you? The voice belonged to an older woman standing near the back of the pavilion. Silver-haired, dressed simply but expensively, someone Teresa hadn't even noticed among the 80 guests until that moment. Teresa turned, and recognition washed over her face slowly, then completely. Mrs. Whitfield, Teresa said, genuine surprise breaking through her usual composure. I didn't realize you'd be here. I'm Sabrina's great-aunt on her mother's side, the woman said, already walking forward through the stunned crowd, ignoring the confused murmurs rippling around her. But I know you from somewhere else entirely. You ran the Ashworth-Klein merger gala in 2019. 4,000 guests, 4 different venues in one weekend, and not a single detail out of place. I sat on that planning committee. I've never seen anything run that smoothly before or since. A ripple of whispers moved through the pavilion. Sabrina lowered her phone slowly, her expression shifting from irritation to confusion. That was you? Preston Langford, Bradley's father, stepped forward from where he'd been standing quietly near the back, his own surprise evident. Teresa, you never mentioned. It wasn't relevant, Teresa said simply. I manage your household now. That's the job I was hired for. Mrs. Whitfield studied her with something close to disbelief. You were the top event director in the entire Southeast region for nearly a decade. I remember when Hartwell Hospitality lost you in that merger. Half the industry tried to poach you afterward. Where on earth did you disappear to? Teresa hesitated, aware of 80 pairs of eyes now fixed entirely on her instead of the seating chart disaster that had started this whole moment. Life happened, she said quietly. My mother needed care. I needed steady work close enough to manage it. This position gave me both. Sabrina, still standing in the middle of the pavilion, looked between her great-aunt and the woman she'd just ordered to leave with an expression caught somewhere between horror and disbelief. You're telling me the housekeeper used to run 4,000-person galas? I'm telling you, Mrs. Whitfield said, turning to her great-niece with a look that carried decades of quiet authority, that the woman you just humiliated in front of your entire wedding party is very possibly the only person within 100 miles capable of fixing what your coordinator broke in the last 24 hours. And you just told her to leave. The silence that followed felt different than the one before. Heavier, more complicated, threaded through with the particular discomfort of 80 people simultaneously recalculating everything they'd assumed about the woman. Standing quietly near the pavilion's edge, Bradley, who had been mostly silent since the seating crisis began, finally stepped forward, looking at Teresa with something like genuine embarrassment. Teresa, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. It's all right, Teresa said, though her tone made clear it wasn't entirely all right, simply that she wasn't in the habit of making scenes about it. I didn't offer the information because it wasn't asked for. Nobody in 3 years ever asked me what I did before this job. The words landed harder than Teresa perhaps intended, settling over the pavilion with the particular weight of an accusation nobody could argue with. Sabrina's face flushed, humiliation now turning inward instead of out. I didn't mean, Sabrina started, then stopped, unsure how to finish a sentence that had no good ending. She had spent the last 3 weeks talking over Teresa, correcting her, dismissing her, all while standing 4 feet from a woman who had once coordinated events for governors, CEOs, and celebrities without breaking a sweat. Preston cleared his throat, stepping fully into the space between his son's fiancée and his housekeeper of 3 years. Teresa, I want to say, on behalf of this family, that this was never how you should have been treated in this house. Not today, not any day before it. Teresa allowed herself a small, tired nod. Thank you, Mr. Langford. Mrs. Whitfield, still standing near the front of the gathered crowd, turned back to Sabrina, with the directness of a woman who had clearly spent a lifetime not caring whose feelings she bruised in service of the truth. Sabrina, your wedding is in 3 days. You have 30 extra guests with nowhere to sit, a catering order that doesn't account for half your dietary restrictions, and a coordinator who isn't answering her phone. You can keep standing here feeling embarrassed about how you spoke to Teresa, or you can actually ask her for help. I'd suggest the second option, given the timeline. The pavilion waited, 80 guests holding their collective breath, watching Sabrina Cole face the exact choice her great-aunt had just laid out in front of everyone. Sabrina turned slowly toward Teresa, swallowing whatever pride remained after the last 10 minutes. Teresa, she said quietly, her voice smaller than it had been all week, would you please help me fix this? I'm asking. Properly this time. Teresa studied her for a long moment before answering. Not out of cruelty, but out of the simple recognition that this was the first genuine question Sabrina Cole had asked her in 3 weeks of planning. Yes, Teresa said finally. I'll help. But we're going to do this my way, and you're going to actually listen this time. Sabrina nodded, something in her posture loosening for the first time in weeks. The particular relief of someone who had been drowning quietly and finally stopped pretending she could swim it out alone. Teresa didn't waste time on ceremony. She picked the clipboard back up off the table, flipped to a blank page, and began working through the pavilion with the brisk, unhurried authority of someone who had done exactly this 100 times before, just never in front of an audience that knew her real history. First problem, Teresa said, walking the length of the garden pavilion, counting chairs under her breath. You don't actually have a seating overflow. You have a seating miscount. Your coordinator built the chart off the original guest list from 6 weeks ago and never updated it after your final RSVPs came in. That's an easy fix. We shift the ceremony seating from 6 rows to 7 and adjust the aisle width by 8 inches. It'll look intentional instead of cramped. Sabrina blinked. That actually makes sense. Second problem, Teresa continued, already moving toward the tent where the reception would be held. Sabrina and Bradley trailing behind her along with Preston and Mrs. Whitfield, the rest of the guests slowly dispersing back into quiet, fascinated conversation. The catering order. How many guests need the modified menu? 11, Sabrina said. 6 vegetarian, 3 gluten-free, 2 with a shellfish allergy. Then we don't need an entirely new order, Teresa said. We need an addendum. I know the executive chef at Magnolia Hall personally. I worked with him on 3 events before I left Hartwell. He can build 11 modified plates as an add-on to your existing order without disrupting the timeline if I call him tonight instead of tomorrow morning. Bradley exchanged a look with his father, something being between disbelief and quiet relief passing between them. You have his personal number? I have quite a few personal numbers, Teresa said simply, not unkindly. 14 years builds a long list. By the time the rehearsal officially resumed an hour later, Teresa had restructured the seating chart, secured the catering addendum with a single phone call, and identified a backup coordinator, a former colleague she trusted completely, to manage day of logistics so that Teresa herself wouldn't be pulled entirely away from her actual job, running the Langford household during the wedding weekend. Sabrina watched all of it unfold with the particular humility of someone confronting, in real time, exactly how wrong she'd been about a person she'd spent 3 weeks looking straight through. She found Teresa near the pavilion's edge as the rehearsal wound down, guests slowly drifting toward their cars in the fading evening light. I owe you a real apology, Sabrina said quietly. Not the one from earlier, a real one. Teresa set down her clipboard, giving Sabrina her full attention. I'm listening. I've spent 3 weeks treating you like you were beneath doing this job well, Sabrina said. Like the fact that you were quiet and didn't argue with me meant you didn't know anything, and the entire time, you were probably better at this than anyone I actually hired. I didn't ask you a single question about yourself in 3 weeks. I didn't ask anyone who works in this house anything about themselves. I think I assumed I already knew everything worth knowing. Teresa considered that for a long moment. The uniform makes people invisible, she said finally. Not because we disappear. Because people stop looking closely enough to see anything past it. It happens more than you'd think, and most people don't even realize they're doing it. Will you actually forgive me? Sabrina asked. Or is that too much to ask after today? I don't need you to apologize for not knowing something I never told you, Teresa said. I need you to remember, after this wedding, after the excitement wears off and I go back to being the woman who manages your household calendar, that I'm still the same person who fixed your seating chart in an hour tonight. Don't let the memory fade the moment the crisis is over. Sabrina nodded slowly, something in her expression settling into genuine resolve rather than performed contrition. I won't, I promise. Mrs. Whitfield, watching the exchange from a short distance away, turned to Preston with the faint, knowing smile of a woman who had seen exactly this kind of reckoning play out before, in rooms far grander than this one. Your household just got a very valuable lesson for the price of one ruined rehearsal, she said. I'd call that a fair trade. Preston nodded slowly, watching his future daughter-in-law and his housekeeper of 3 years standing together in quiet, careful conversation as the last of the evening light faded over the garden. I should have known Teresa's worth a long time before tonight, he admitted. That's on me too, not just Sabrina. 3 days remained before the wedding. And for the first time since planning began, Teresa Alvarado wasn't just the woman quietly holding the Langford household together in the background. She was the reason the wedding was going to happen at all. The wedding day arrived without a single visible flaw. The seating flowed naturally across 7 rows instead of 6. The 11 modified plates came out from Magnolia Hall exactly on schedule. And the backup coordinator Teresa had brought in ran the day's logistics so smoothly that most guests never knew anything had nearly gone wrong at all. Teresa herself stayed mostly out of sight, exactly as she preferred, quietly checking in with the catering staff and the florists between her usual household duties, declining Bradley's offer to introduce her formally to any of the wedding guests. "I'm happy managing things from where I'm comfortable," she told him, when he pressed gently during the reception. "You don't owe me a spotlight. You already gave me something better." What Bradley had given her, 3 days after the rehearsal, was a formal offer, drafted with his father's full support, to create a new position within the Langford family's growing hospitality holdings. Director of Estate Events, overseeing not just the Langford household but the family's expanding portfolio of boutique event venues across the Southeast. The very kind of work Teresa had built her original career on, now offered back to her with none of the corporate instability that had cost her the first version of it. "You don't have to decide today," Preston told her, sliding the offer letter across his study desk a week after the wedding. "But I want you to know we see you now, fully. Not just as the person who keeps this house running, though God knows you do that better than anyone. As someone who was, and still is, exceptional at something much bigger than any of us realized." Teresa read the offer twice before answering, thinking about 14 years she'd spent building a reputation, about the merger that had erased it overnight, about 3 quiet years in a household that had never once asked what she'd left behind. "I'll take it," she said finally. "On one condition. Name it. I choose my own team. And nobody who works for me gets treated the way I was treated in that pavilion 3 weeks ago. Not because they don't have a hidden resume worth discovering, but because nobody should need one to be treated with basic respect in the first place." Preston extended his hand across the desk. "Agreed." Sabrina, for her part, made good on her promise. She and Teresa never became close friends exactly. Some gaps don't fully close, even after a genuine apology. But Sabrina made a habit, in the months that followed, of actually asking questions. About the household staff she'd once looked past entirely. About the people who quietly kept the family's businesses and homes running while she'd spent years assuming their whole worth began and ended with a job title. She started small, mostly, but she started a year later at the Langford family's annual charity gala, the first major event fully run under Teresa's new title. Mrs. Whitfield found Teresa near the reception hall, watching the evening unfold with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd built exactly the kind of flawless event she used to be famous for. "You know," Mrs. Whitfield said, "I've been to 100 galas in my life. This is the best-run one I've seen in a decade." 14 years of practice, Teresa said, allowing herself a small smile. Plus 3 years of being underestimated. Turns out that part built some patience, too. Here's the truth this story leaves us with. The person quietly holding your world together might be capable of far more than you've ever bothered to ask about. Respect shouldn't require a resume to be earned, and sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone isn't admiration after the fact. It's the simple decision to ask who they really are before you assume you already know. If this story moved you tonight, if it reminded you that dignity has nothing to do with a job title, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that everyone deserves to be asked before they're judged. Thank you for staying until the end. And remember, silence in a room often means more people are paying attention than you think.